We are recording with Mr. James Roguski on Monday, March 25th, 2024 at 12:20 p.m. Eastern Time. Guys, if you like the shows I do with the doctors or like today where I'm sure we're going to get all sorts of shills talking about how we're spreading, misinformation and killing grandma, I think it's funny that people think that. If you liked any of the guests I have on, from Delta Force to doctors and everything in between, the fact that I'm able to do all these things independently and not bend the need to, well, all the platforms I'm banned from is because I have sponsors and sponsoring the show. American Hartford Gold. Please go to the link is in the description. Use promo code Tommy or text Tommy to 65532. And yeah, I mean, we're going to World War III eventually, and if not, there's still inflation. So I don't know, buy some bullion, dude. It's this is what I always say. It's not like you're buying an iPhone that's $1,500, and as soon as you buy it, you lose half the value. If you're spending $1,000 on silver, you're getting $1,000 of silver. So I mean, you're not really doing anything. You're just converting money and helping the show. So don't be a communist. Help my show. But guys, if you go into the description as well, his Substack is there, and we were put in touch by Jonah Gold, who's been on here before, talking about the WHO pandemic treaty, and it. I just had on Dr. Nass like 2 weeks ago talking about it. And it really is. I mean, I think if Orwell read it, he'd be like, "Oh shit! Like I didn't go far enough." Like like they want to control like the carbon cycle. But Mr. Roguski, please introduce yourself and take it away.
James Roguski. I live in California, and approximately 2 years ago, actually 2 years and a day ago, I wrote an enormous article about the quote unquote pandemic treaty. Did a month and a half or so of research, put it all out there on the 24th of March, 2022. Thought I was moving on to the next thing. And on the 28th, I stumbled into a document that was online, in public. It wasn't hacked or, it wasn't any kind of whistleblower document or anything like that. But it was a totally different issue related, but it was a document from the US government, amendments to the international health regulations. And it's like, wait a minute, that's totally different than what I had just reported on. And so that two-headed beast, if you will, has been a source of enormous confusion over the last 2 years, because what happens is when people talk about these two separate things, they typically generally wrap it all up into one ball and say, oh, it's the pandemic treaty. And so hopefully today we can clarify what is going on with these two very separate things. Now, something happened in 2022, which almost everybody has gotten wrong. And in 2023, they did a lot of talking, but nothing really happened. And what's coming up for their May meeting in 2024, quite frankly, the misinformation about what's going on is gigantic. And so, if people can come out of this discussion that we're having today with some clarity and a focus, boy, that would be spectacular.
Yeah. And for everybody listening, it happened on Thursday when I did an episode, and it's happening right now. I've never had a problem with OBS Studio before, but it's like the stream is glitching. So if anybody's watching, I don't know what it looks like on Rumble. I'll upload a screen recorder copy after, and it will be perfect. So don't worry about it. Could you clarify then what is the confusion around the treaty? Because so for laymen like myself, my understanding, I guess through Dr. Nass and maybe through Dr. Malone, is it's right. It's the idea of kind of putting national sovereignty in the back seat to a pandemic. There's like one person who can claim that there's a pandemic. There really needs to be there's no like number threshold of deaths or virality, and they can pretty much supersede any domestic being of all the nations, really any law to protect the common good of man, which is always that good communist idea of it's for the greater good. And it's even going farther. Dr. Nass pointed out to really the life cycle itself. Well, what if a pandemic jumps to I don't know, animals, or what if something's happening with plants? It is the blank check to do whatever you want. That's my understanding as someone who does a million shows, and I try
Mhm.
to take away the takeaway from each episode, and I'm not sure how accurate I get it. Is that anywhere close to the truth or not?
As with all good propaganda, there's a certain amount of truth mixed in with a certain amount of confusion in all of that. And so let's see if we can clarify this in a couple of sentences. Okay. That'll be a hard thing to accomplish. But if people actually listen and learn from the, not from me, okay, don't listen to people. Anything you hear somebody say, that's hearsay, right? What I've been encouraging everybody for 2 years to do is, get the references, get the source material, go to the documents and identify, what the actual reality is. So with one sentence, okay, over the last 4 years, the people who may have abused your rights and freedoms on whatever level, business, city, county, state, national, whatever it might have been, they did not need any amendments to the international health regulations, and they did not need any pandemic treaty to abuse your rights and freedoms. Whatever they did over the past 4 years, they did on their own by overstepping their authority, pretending to have authority, coercing people with all kinds of, I'm sure you've been through all of the things that have happened, the masks and the jabs and the drugs and the, you're going to lose your job or you can't travel, this, that, and the other thing. Those are all still and always have been local issues. The people who abused you are the people that what their face looks like. Okay. And they claimed that they had some kind of authority. Now, they might have said something like, well, the FDA said, and the CDC said, and the WHO said. That's all hearsay. I heard somebody say, right? The person who abused your rights and freedoms, you can probably call them by name. And that is a local issue. Since, COVID kind of wound down a little bit more than a year ago, many local jurisdictions have actually passed laws that are worse. There's been laws passed in many states, many cities, many counties, that give additional authority to local officials to do some of the most dystopian things you could imagine. The problem with mandates and lockdowns and any of these things that people dealt with, that is a local issue. And unless you fix it locally, I'll give a good example. 45 minutes away from me, a couple of years ago, activists in Palmdale, California, just pounded on their city council and said, we want the city council to pass an ordinance that outlawed mandates for masks or jabs. So in Palmdale, California, it's not allowed for any company or government or anybody to have any kind of mandated mask or jab. That was 2 years ago. Okay. Every city, every county, every state, people need to work on a local level. It's not about the WHO. Okay. It's local. Now, when you go to understand what the amendments to the international health regulations are, almost everybody's getting punked. Now, I don't know if everybody knows what that means when I said that, but what happened was a long story. I'm going to try to give the short version of it. It started when I found this document. I found it on March 28th, 2022, but it was submitted more than 2 months earlier than that, kind of very similar to the moment that we're having right now. On January 18th, 2022, the Biden administration submitted a number of amendments to the existing international health regulations, the most egregious of which was currently, if amendments go into if amendments are adopted by the yearly meeting of the WHO, there's a 2-year period before they come into effect. Well, he wanted to shorten that to 6 months. And because he presented it appropriately with 4 months notice before the meeting, he submitted it in January, the meeting's traditionally at the end of May. All of the other nations looked at that and they said, no way. They just kicked it to the curb. When the meeting in May of 2022 showed up, that package of amendments was just kicked to the curb because they had that 4-month period to consider it. Well, they weren't happy with that. So what they did is in the middle of the assembly on May 24th, 2022, the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, handful of other nations submitted a smaller package of amendments to different articles in the middle of the assembly in violation of the International Health Regulations Article 55, which says you got to give 4 months notice. They just said, screw that, here's a new package. 4 days later, on the 28th of May, they published a document saying that they had agreed to those changes. So little problem here though. They never actually voted. And so it took 18 months to get 12 members of the European Parliament, led by Rob Roos from the Netherlands, to write a letter to Tedros saying, hey, you guys say you adopted these amendments, but there's no proof that you ever voted. It says in the document that in the 8th session that they adopted these amendments, but you can actually watch the 8th session. You can go to the 75th World Health Assembly in 2022, watch the 8th session. They never mentioned it. And so, we know that we have problems with election integrity. They've taken it to an art form. They just don't even bother voting. They just said, yeah, we passed it. It's good. And nobody's saying a freaking word. Now, Rob Roos from the Netherlands was at Senator Ron Johnson's latest meeting in Washington. He had, a whole bunch of people talking. He mentioned it to him, and you might as well have dropped it into a black hole. It should be a worldwide controversy that the WHO is so corrupt that they claimed that they adopted amendments to the international health regulations. They never voted. You bring it, to their attention, you bring it to the Senator Johnson's attention, and nobody does jack. Okay, fast forward, at that same meeting, the nations were upset that the United States had tried to make these changes. So they said, hey, you know what? Thanks for the idea. You want to change the international health regulations? We'll show you how to change the international health regulations. They set up a working group for amendments to the international health regulations, and they told all of the nations to submit their proposed amendments by September 30th of 2022. It's almost a year and a half ago now. Well, on that date, all of the submissions were put together. There was 94 nations in total submitted 197 pages with over 300 amendments to an 84-page document. They kept it secret until mid-December when they finally published it. And I've been, talking about it ad nauseum since then. But prior to that becoming public, I was blessed to be guided to watch the B20 meetings in Bali. They have the G20 where the 20 largest nations meet, but they also have a B20 where all the business leaders meet. And so the Indonesian health minister, who's not a doctor, he's a banker, he talked about a couple of different things, and really it sets the stage for everything you need to know about what is going on. What he said, number one, and this applies mostly to the amendments, even though there's 200 pages and 300 amendments, he pretty much nailed it back in November of 2022. He knew what was in the amendments. They had been submitted, but they had not yet been made public. And what he said about the amendments was, well, he told a couple of lies. He said, at the beginning of 2020, we had to lock down the world. And I'm like, no, you didn't. That was a bad choice. Then he said that hurt the economy. Well, yeah, but it mostly hurt mom and pop stores, not the big companies. And then he said he was very proud that what they had presented was that he said, in the future, if you're properly jabbed or properly tested, then you'll be able to travel. That is all you need to know about the amendments. The international health regulations purpose is to have nations be open and transparent in the sense of they're obligated to surveil their own population and report to the WHO if there's some kind of unusual outbreak or whatever. If you actually read the existing international health regulations, they're not about health at all. What they are really, they should be called the International Surveillance, Monitoring, Reporting, Emergency Declaring, Fear-Mongering Control Regulations. Okay. The idea in 2005, when they made a whole bunch of amendments, was that every nation should be encouraged to say, hey, we got a problem. And they should feel confident that they're not going to be hit with travel restrictions because then they're not going to want to tell you. Okay. Well, what happened when, nations submit that information is that other nations put on lockdowns. And so what they're trying to push through is the ability to quarantine individual travelers if they're not jabbed or not tested. Well, in a perfect world, maybe, okay, if jabs worked and tests were accurate, maybe you could grudgingly say, I see your point. Let all the healthy people go through. If somebody's truly sick, take them to the hospital and care for them. But that's not what they're trying to do. What's in the amendments that nobody is talking about is that the WHO wants to be the decider of which jabs can be used in this setup. They want to be the ones who decide whether or not a jab is usable by nations to, be required for travel. And they also want to put in language, that requires additional paperwork in the form of a test. So imagine you're going on a trip, maybe taking a cruise somewhere and you land at a port of call. Well, the documentation in the international health regulations says that the captain of the ship has to report to the authority at the port and say, well, yeah, we tested everybody. Everybody's fine. We got all the records of people not testing. Oh, but wait a minute. Here's this couple of people that they didn't pass their test or they didn't get their jab or whatever it might be. Boom, into quarantine you go, either on board the ship or on land. Now, the way they have the language in the latest version of the amendments is that, they talk about when you're embarking or disembarking. So what's really going on with these amendments, we were told by the health minister of Indonesia back in November of 2022 that that is what they want to do. They want to be able to control individual people's ability to get on or off a ship or a plane or whatever, and boom, into quarantine you go. A lot of the language that they've added is about quarantine. Why nobody's talking about that? I don't know. I've been talking about it for a year and a half now. That is the issue because that's the purpose of the international health regulations is to control international travel. Now, unfortunately, that's not unconstitutional. And here's the trick that they're playing. Do you recall the tennis player? I don't know if I'm going to pronounce his name properly, Novak Djokovic, who tried to get into play. He's, famously Novak for, Novaks for Novak,
Yeah.
right? He refused the jab, smart man, brave man, but he was not allowed in when the rules in the United States were, the irony and the hypocrisy of having a wide open border, but stopping somebody who's coming in officially because they're not jabbed. The problem with our Constitution, call it a problem if you want, it applies to us as citizens. We know that no one can force us to get a jab. They can trick us, they can coerce us, they can, bribe us or whatever, but they can't legally make us do it. But that's not the case with somebody who's not a citizen who wants to come into the country. So the trick that they're playing with the amendments is every nation can abide by their own constitution, not apply these things to their own citizen, but apply them to everybody else in the world. So if every nation infringes upon the freedom to travel of all non-citizens, then you're in planet lockdown. It is an ingenious trick that they're trying to implement. And quite frankly, even exiting the WHO would not fix the problem. Because even if we were not a member of the WHO, if every other nation on the planet said, oh, well, they're following the WHO system, we wouldn't be forced to not travel by our country. But once you land in another country, you're at their mercy. And so this is the trick behind the amendments that nobody is talking about. So thanks for the opportunity for that. Let me move on to the treaty because everybody gets them all mixed up. There's a whole bunch of stuff that was in those 197 pages and 300 amendments. People are, I don't know if you know the concept of a red herring. A red herring is a very smelly fish. And if a dog or wolf, a bloodhound or somebody is chasing, a scent, you get something really stinky and you point to it, people look over there, and there's all kinds of red herrings being talked about. And nobody's talking about what the Indonesian health minister said way back in November, that is what they want. If you're properly tested, properly jabbed, then you can travel. Well, hold on. I don't think I'm going to get an argument from you. The things that they call vaccines, um, they're not vaccines. They're gene therapies. They're biological weapons. They don't stop infection. They don't stop transmission. What the heck is a vaccine certificate? The tests. Now, if they're doing travel testing, PCR is kind of tough because it takes a little bit of time to do that fraudulent test. So it's likely that they would be dealing with the rapid antigen tests. You want to leave the boat or leave the airplane and you've got to be tested before you go. You need something, 15-minute test or something like that. They don't determine whether or not someone is ill. It's a complete and total fraud. So what is a testing certificate? Well, it's a certificate of compliance. If you're willing to submit to their ridiculous requirements, then you get to travel. It's got nothing to do with health. It's got everything to do with control. And so, in summary, if people think of the amendments to the international health regulations, number one, in 2022, they lied and they said they adopted amendments to speed up the process. They want to shorten it from 2 years to 1 year to put into effect, but they never voted. And so, with the amendments that are currently being negotiated, the core is that they want this quarantine upon international travel. Now, I am not implying that that means interstate travel or going to a movie or a ball game. That's all local. That's all your local government. So, oh, well, the WHO wants this for international travel. So, here's what we're doing locally. It's got nothing, there's no connection there other than in your mind. Okay. If they can hypnotize you, I've often called them the World Hypnosis Organization, just because so and so said so, then we get to say so too. Well, I can tell you where that started and how it got confused. I'll give you a little fun test. Does the date January 19th, 2017 mean anything to you? Because on that date, the CDC put into the Federal Register a final ruling about quarantine and international travel and emergency declarations and all that sort of stuff. And what they put in there was the definition of a public health emergency to be declared by the Secretary of Health and Human Services here in the United States. And one of the reasons that our Secretary of Health and Human Services can use to declare an emergency in the United States is if the Director General of the WHO declared what's called a public health emergency of international concern, PHEIC, or FAKE. If he says there's a FAKE, it doesn't mean that our nation is obligated to declare a public health emergency. It's an enabling thing in the definition. And that date that I gave you was the last full day of the Obama administration. So what we're dealing with is not that the WHO would be telling us we have to do something. It gives regulatory cover. It gives an excuse. It's an enabling statement, where then our Secretary of Health and Human Services can say, oh, well, he said so. And then the state health agency says, well, the federal agency said so. And then the county says the state said so. And then your local person says, well, none of that is authority. None of that is with any kind of um, statistical basis, or there's no check or balance. He said so, so he said so, so he said so, so she said so, so she said so.
It's not a law.
What we need to do is go, I don't give a shit. Unalienable rights, the word unalienable means that you can't take that right away. I don't give a crap who said what. And there's a pun in there, who said what. The issue with the amendments is they have the ability within the constitutional confines of our legal system for our government to abuse the rights of foreign citizens who want to travel to the United States and vice versa. So I can already hear a lot of people in America, I'm not going to go anywhere. I don't care. Okay, great. You give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Yeah, it'll soon be interstate or interstate travel, and then probably intrastate from county to county, and then it's
Intra home, you can't go from your
well, yeah, no,
bedroom to,
walk it out to the nth degree. Give it what,
yeah.
5 years, 10 years? What do you want? 20 years, and then it's like, hey, man, I don't know if you should be getting in your car. You're not vaccinated. You don't think it will? It will absolutely do that. And concerning the whole, it's not a law. I don't care what they said. Just growing up with strict conservative Catholic parents, it was more along the, well, Matt's mom says Matt's mom's not your mom. What did I say? And you're like, oh, shit.
Yep.
I don't care. I don't. But JP is. You're not JP. Okay.
Well, I grew up with exactly the opposite. The
All
thing I
right.
got from the thing I got from my parents was, if your friends were going to jump off a cliff, are you going
Would
to
you
jump
would you
off?
follow them if they're all jumping off a
Yeah,
bridge? Would you jump off
yeah,
too? And
yeah.
I don't know, maybe, but but
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
All right. So we're only halfway through,
yeah.
right? And so what has happened is the amendments that Biden proposed that got rejected, and then the amendments that they lied about, and these amendments that are currently being negotiated, have been kept secret since really December of 2022. In October of 2023, I'm sorry, October, November, December, January, almost 6 months ago, the working group for these amendments said very clearly, and I reported on this in October, that they were not going to meet their deadline. And they didn't meet their deadline. By rights, there should have been a final copy of the amendments prior to January 27th of 2024, which is 4 months in advance of the May meeting. Well, they missed that deadline. It's 2 months past that just about now already. And still to this date, we have not been given an official version of the amendments that they are, negotiated to the point where they want to submit them. They should not be allowed to even consider adopting any amendments at their May meeting because they failed to meet their deadline. They know they failed to meet their deadline. I have an hour-long video of them conspiring to violate Article 55 that says they got to give 4 months notice. They had a meeting in February. They had a meeting in March. They're having meetings April 22nd to the 26th. They don't really seem to care. And unfortunately, nobody's talking about it. And so thanks again for the opportunity for this. So with the amendments, about 2 weeks ago, a little bit more than 2 weeks ago, I found what's the right word for using this? A unofficial version of the negotiating text of the amendments that are currently being negotiated was put up on the website by one of their what they call relevant stakeholders. I was looking for something else and I happened to stumble upon it. And on March 9th, I published the latest version. I believe it to be a legitimate version because somebody would have had to go through a heck of a lot of work to, fake it out. Soon after I published it, they took it down from their website because it wasn't supposed to be there. It was supposed to be secret.
Mm.
I've done freedom of information requests to the State Department and the Health and Human Services Department. People in Australia have done freedom of information requests for this document elsewhere around the world. This is like a gold mine. This is the most up-to-date status of the negotiations. And you can see that they're having great difficulty reaching agreement. And the troubling part in these agreements, or these amendments rather, is what the health minister said back in 2022, um, quarantining people upon traveling is what they want from these amendments. And people need to realize that that is the problem. I get it. If you don't plan on leaving the United States anytime soon, that directly is not going to have an impact on you, but it filters down. Like you said, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Now, that same Indonesian health minister at that same meeting in November of 2022 was talking about something else. So if I can draw like a line in the timeline of what we're talking about here, what we're going to be talking about from now on is the other agreement, which most people call the pandemic treaty. Now, what he was talking about in November was something that is very parallel to the treaty, but it's a third thing. And what he said was that he knew in November of 2022 something that was about to drop in December of 2022. So he was talking to all the business leaders, and he said, look, the Defense Department of the United States and the US government, along with a bunch of other nations, are working with the World Bank, and they're going to be putting forth the pandemic fund, where they're going to be building out the industry to look for pathogens, bring them into laboratories, do gain of function, and then turn that into profitable products and control all of the distribution of what's going on. That's what the pandemic fund is busy doing as we speak. But he spoke about it before it was put into place officially. And he told all the business leaders, this is a great business opportunity. Go invest. And so from November 2022, even before any of the amendments were made available, it was obvious that what he was talking about was a business venture. Fast forward 1 month, December 2022, the Congress passed and Biden signed the National Defense Authorization Act. It's
Mm-hmm.
a yearly thing. It feeds the beast of the Defense Department. Buried in there as part of their global health security agenda. That's not health, that's health security, which is code word for, in my mind, biological warfare. They had pledged $5 billion over the next 5 years to build out that industry under the control of the Defense Department. Well, in 2023, through the World Bank, they dished out $340 million to 37 different countries to start building laboratories and surveillance um, technologies um, in 37 other countries. Now, what does surveillance mean to them? It's not cameras and audio recording or GPS on your phone. Surveillance is essentially the collection of genetic information. And what they want to do is spend billions of dollars getting every scrap of any kind of DNA or RNA or any genetic information from everything that's moving to bring into a central database so that they can turn it into money. If you go back to January of 2020, when there was a simple little data file that was shared, and it was claimed that that was the Wuhan Institute of Virology 1 genome, which they changed the name to SARS-CoV-2. Think about that data file with just a bunch of letters in it for the genetic code. That was worth hundreds of billions of dollars. If you could find the next scary pathogen and turn that into a product to treat the next scary pathogen, you're talking about billions of dollars. Well, maybe even trillions. And so what happened a couple of years after that when Omicron popped up in South Africa and Botswana, they did what they thought they were supposed to do under the international health regulations. They were transparent. They go, look, we found this thing. It's totally different than anything else. Here's Omicron. They were greeted with travel restrictions, which they were not happy about. But then the kick in the balls was that Pfizer and Moderna put that information into the boosters
Mm-hmm.
and made a couple of more $1 billion. The negotiations that are going on right now, literally today, this week, it's ending on Thursday, they're having great difficulty because the poorer nations are saying, hey, you want us to hand over, and this is in the freaking document. If people would just read it, when you read up on sovereignty in the pandemic treaty, the sovereignty that they're negotiating is the sovereign control over biological resources. They're essentially saying, hey, this is our bad boy pathogen. We know it's worth billions of dollars. What are you going to give us for it? We're not handing it over again. Fool us once, not you're not going to fool us twice. They handed over $1 billion worth of data and got nothing. Pfizer and Moderna turned all the profit. And so the arguments that are going on in this negotiations for a new agreement are not about national sovereignty, the way people think about national sovereignty. It's about pharmaceutical companies wanting to keep all of their profits, but they want all of the nations to hand over their pathogens so that they can turn them into drugs and jabs and sell them. Well, what they're debating is they want, meaning the smaller nations of the global south, want investment capital from wealthy nations in the global north to build out geographically distributed manufacturing so that if they find a pathogen, they can make their own jabs and drugs and inflict those on their own people so that they can profit from it. Now, you got to take a step back and go, hold on a minute. These people are evil.
Mm-hmm.
The jabs, maybe if it was some life-saving something, okay, you could see the logic, but they are absolutely ignorant of any idea that these jabs are biological weapons. They want the capacity to inflict that upon their own people and turn to profit from it. So the summary of what's going on with the treaty, it's got nothing to do with your dealing with your doctor. It's got nothing to do with national sovereignty about them telling you what to do. I challenge everybody to get out their pocket constitution and look at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. It's the Commerce Clause. What we're dealing with here is a trade agreement. That's why they call it an agreement. It's got nothing to do with the WHO telling us how to live our lives. It's got everything to do with oligarchs in the global south wanting to set up a much bigger fund than the United States Defense Department's pandemic fund to have tens of billions of dollars that essentially come from poor people in rich nations. Think tax money or national debt being increased. They want nations like the United States to put billions of dollars into a fund that this new conference of the parties would operate and control to distribute, to build out what I call the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex in the global south so that oligarchs in those nations can turn a profit by inflicting, tests that are BS and vaccines that are really biological weapons on their own people because people in the global south couldn't afford to pay $20 a dose for a Pfizer jab. They can still turn a profit at 5 or 10 if they can get the governments to put money into a fund to build the industry. They can then jab the people that they missed the first time around.
Mm-hmm.
So the core thing in this pandemic treaty, Articles 10, 11, 12, 13, and 20 and 21, is they want to use the One Health surveillance to look for pathogens everywhere. Any swab that goes up your nose or any stool sample from your pet when you go to the veterinarian's office or your chicken coop or your pigsty or, horses and cows and whatever. Hospitals, they're even surveilling wastewater from septic systems, sewage systems, and airline, flights from foreign nations. The CDC has a whole wastewater surveillance program. You could look it up and see it for yourself. They want to find the next pathogen with pandemic potential. And when I hear that phrase, I put another word that starts with P. It's really pathogens with pandemic profiteering potential. Bring them into the WHO coordinated laboratory network, have a standard material transfer agreement. They want contracts so that if they hand over their pathogen, they're going to get some benefit. They want to set up a pathogen access and benefit sharing system, which means if we give you our pathogens, which is their sovereign natural resource, then we get some of the benefits. And then they want the WHO to, what's the word they use? Harmonize the regulatory process to speed up the approval. In the amendments, they want the WHO to be the decider of, this jab and that drug are what is accepted to be used worldwide. And then they have what they call the Global Distribution and Logistics Network, that they want the WHO to be in charge of that. The WHO doesn't want to be involved in telling you and your doctor how to practice medicine. They want to be involved in the almost $1 trillion distribution side of that business, where they decide which products and which companies get the contracts, put them into their distribution hub. They proudly proclaim they've got a 20,000 square meter distribution hub in Dubai, one of their 6 regions. That's 4 football fields. So I've dubbed this the new OPEC. OPEC stands for the oil producing and exporting countries, Saudi Arabia and so forth. Well, the new OPEC is the Organization of Pandemic Emergency Corporations. All of the companies that are in that industry that the Indonesian health minister was giving advance notice, hey, get involved in the pandemic preparedness industry. It's a moneymaker. What they're creating is a racketeering, organized crime, mafia organization to control the research, development, manufacture, distribution, and logistics, so that then they can say, hey, there's an emergency here and an emergency there. So we got to pull some of this product out and use it over there. Oh, I guess we need another contract to resupply. What you're looking at is just corruption on a level that is, almost unbelievable until you actually read the damn document. Okay. It's not about mandates. It's not about telling your doctor how to treat you. It's not about national sovereignty. It's actually an expression of national sovereignty. Because if you go to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, the Commerce Clause in our Constitution, when the 13 nations agreed to set up the federal government, they put the federal government in charge of regulating international trade with foreign nations. What we're dealing with here is a trade agreement and I don't know if this rings a bell for you, about a decade ago, the Trans-Pacific
Yeah,
Partnership,
TPP. I remember that.
which had kind of been started with Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, and then Obama signed off on it. It was a done deal before the people found out about it.
Yeah.
And when we learned that they were handing over, control to corporations, we the people made such a stink, because even though that was very secret and it was very complicated, people took the time to understand what it really was. And so we all need to understand that the control between you and your doctor and your healthcare provider and your hospital and your place of employment and your local everything, that is a local issue. You've got to fix the laws, and you've got to, smack your officials with the newspaper in the nose and go, hey, no, we have unalienable rights. You are not going to infringe upon our rights. The amendments are about international travel, quarantine, and putting the WHO in charge of what test and what vaccine can be used when you're traveling internationally. Now, that may filter down locally, but that's not forced, that's enabled. You got to know the difference. And the treaty, it's got nothing to do with any of that. The treaty is a money-making business proposition that our government and all of the other governments, they all want it to happen because they all want to profit from it. They're just haggling over, which piece of the pie comes from the pharmaceutical industry and wealthy nations to be invested in the pharmaceutical industry in poor nations. It's the enemy in the treaty is not the WHO. The WHO just wants to manage all of that and have and here's probably the only thing everybody needs to know. Articles 21 through 37, chapter 3 of the quote unquote treaty, it's not really a treaty. It's being structured as a framework convention that is very similar to the Framework Convention for Climate Change. Well, how's that working out? In 1992, our Senate gave 2/3 consent. We're signed on with every other nation in the United Nations to a framework convention. Well, what's a framework convention? It's just something that you hang new rules on. So year after year after year, they have a conference of the parties, and whatever the heck these unelected, unaccountable, unknown bureaucrats, does anybody know who represented their nation at the 28th conference of the parties, that happened in December? Nobody has the foggiest idea. On a year after year basis, they make new rules, and we agreed in advance, kind of like if you signed a blank check or if you were signing a contract and the other party put a bunch of blank paper in there and said, oh, go ahead, sign it. Don't worry, we'll figure that out later. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to bring in this pandemic treaty light, which is just, well, just agree to this. And it literally says in the document that, we'll worry about the financial details at our first meeting. Just sign here. Well, how much is that going to cost us? Where's that money going to go? Who's going to be in charge of handing out billions of dollars worth of contracts? All of the people in the negotiations know that they're going to be on the receiving end of billions of dollars of contracts. So they want in on the game. These negotiations are just, organizing the mafiosa families around the world of, who wants in on the deal. Don't pay any attention to this. Don't see it for what it is. Talk about something else. Go smell a red herring over here. Don't understand that this is a trade deal. And unfortunately, our Constitution gives our federal government the authority, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, to govern and oversee commerce internationally. This is just a corrupt modern version of the TPP. And if you think that the Framework Convention for Climate Change was a wonderful idea and you love how that's working out, then you'll love the Framework Convention for Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness, and Response. The answer needs to be hell no. We don't want to give our tax dollars and debt money over to a fund run by the conference of the parties to meet year after year after year to dish out billions of dollars to their cronies. The missing piece of the puzzle here that nobody in these negotiations is talking about is, excuse me, the nations who got the jabs and used remdesivir and used Paxlovid and molnupiravir and refused to use essential medications or vitamin D or zinc or any of that sort of thing. The nations who used big pharma have suffered enormously. African nations had 1/16th the amount of deaths attributed to COVID. So why are we exporting the pharmaceutical model that worked horribly, was deadly, into the regions of the world that did 16 times better? Okay. The only answer is they want a piece of the money. They didn't profit from that because they handed over the genetic information to Pfizer and Moderna, who turned it into billions. And then they used those biological weapons on primarily people in the Americas and Europe to great harm. And they weren't able to do that to the poorer nations because they couldn't afford the contracts. So now they want us to build out their industry in the nations that couldn't afford to inflict biological warfare on their own people. The argument really comes down to our Defense Department is busy doing that already. 2 years ago, I published an article about the 36 Defense Department funded biological laboratories in the Ukraine. That's just a drop in the bucket, people. There are hundreds of these labs, and they're putting out money now to build more. They, I'll leave it with a rhetorical question that everybody should be able to answer. Do you think the best way to prevent the next pandemic is to go looking for pathogens, bring them into a WHO coordinated laboratory network, maybe do some gain of function on them, turn them into drugs and jabs, and put the WHO in charge of the distribution network while you're speeding up the regulatory approval and making sure that no pharmaceutical company is liable for any of that problem? Is that going to be the way to stop the next pandemic? Or is that how you would set up a racketeering organization to profit from the pandemic that you're looking for, disease X? That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
It's perfect. It's beautiful. You've got that. You've got that down pat. But yeah, that seems to be exactly what it is. Is I had on Dr. Andrew Huff from Eco Health Alliance, and he would talk about like he's like, yeah, like USAID, like we'd get these alerts about a new pathogen was emergent, and we would send these kind of like airborne labs, like these like hermetically sealed cargo planes.
Mhm.
We would send them there, and it's like, oh, are we going to squash this? And it was like, no, we'd send them there, get all the samples, and fly it back to some DoD lab. And it was like, what? That's like you calling the cops and being like, they're breaking my house down, they're stealing everything, and the cops come and they they grab some shit too and leave. You'd be like, whoa, 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 wait, what? What the fuck? Like, but that seems to be what it is. It's the it's a 2024 take on Smedley Butler's 1933 War as a Racket, right? It's I've knocked over
Biological warfare is a racket.
yeah,
Absolutely.
it's Smedley Butler all over again. I've knocked
Mhm.
over South American countries for Domino Sugar, and I've knocked
Mhm.
over Middle Eastern monarchs for BP oil. What's his quota? Al Capone. Al Capone should ask me for some advice. He ran a racket in three counties. I ran a racket on three continents.
Exactly.
It's just
Exactly.
it will never end. But you know,
So to summarize this,
sure.
okay, the issues with mandates and lockdowns and social distancing and all that sort of stuff, nobody local to you needed any amendments or a treaty. Whatever they did to you in the past, they've probably strengthened, the legal fraud by crafting legislation that appears to give them the authority to take away your rights. The only one who can take away your rights is you when you stop defending them. So those issues are local issues. The amendments primarily are about quarantine and international travel and having the WHO be the one who sets the standards for, oh, you get to use this jab and this test. That is not what people have been saying the amendments are about. And the treaty is just organized crime. I mean, it's, organization of pandemic emergency corporations trying to set up their business model to take money from poor people in rich nations and give that money to rich people in poor nations.
Mm.
None of this has got anything to do with the questions that we all still need to have answers to. The pandemic didn't cause the problems or the death. The misguided and evil response to the pandemic is what caused the problems. The lockdowns, the mandates, the masks, the jabs, the drugs, all that sort of thing. People need to understand that it's not the WHO that we're battling. Okay, it's the pharmaceutical industry, I've stolen their acronym. They talk about the public health emergency of international concern, the PHEIC, or the FAKE. Well, the real FAKE is the Pharmaceutical Hospital Emergency Industrial Complex. If you realize how they have crafted the law to throw money at them as soon as somebody says there's an emergency, all of the bets are off, all of the rules change, all of the regulations go out the window. Oh, it's an emergency. Throw money at big pharma and big hospital. That is what we are battling. Now, on top of all of that, we've got the Defense Department with the pandemic fund sharing billions of dollars around the world to build out this industry that goes looking for pathogens, like you said, with the hermetically sealed lab, to bring them back in to find the next scary pathogen. And I think that the WHO has fund envy. They're looking at that saying, well, we want to do that, but we want to do that for the whole world. We want $30 billion a year to build out that industry under their control. That is not controlling your relationship with your doctor and your health choices. That is controlling the flow of multiple billions of dollars of contracts, so that they've got product sitting in a warehouse itching for a problem for it to be applied to. If they have the authority to declare an emergency here and declare an emergency there, if the local officials are compliant and can be tricked or coerced or manipulated into locally saying, oh, yes, the WHO says we have a problem. So these people here need to have these products brought in and these germ teams flown in. I'll give you a clue as to where the next big one is likely to happen. The same groups that did Event 201 in October of 2022, October of 2019, also did a tabletop simulation in October of 2022 called Catastrophic Contagion. And it's set to happen, according to their simulation, of all places in eastern Venezuela and Guyana. So pay attention to what's going on in eastern Venezuela and Guyana, because Venezuela is claiming that they've annexed like 2/3 of Guyana. And why, might you ask? Well, in the Caribbean, north of Guyana, they found enormous oil reserves. Well, the Johns Hopkins group and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation did catastrophic contagion, the simulation. Well, the next virus that they say is going to hit children in that region. And I had a little fun with it because I noticed that they failed to buy the domain name catastrophiccontagion.com. So if you go to catastrophiccontagion.com, you'll see me spoofing on them. This is their simulation. They simulated COVID with Event 201. They simulated monkeypox almost to the day. And now they're simulating what they call seers. It's an enterovirus. It's like seers. Are they like psychic? They can see the future. Interestingly enough, last Thursday, at one of the meetings that they had for the negotiations for the treaty, South African co-chair Precious Mtsotso said to the group there, well, we really have to reach this pandemic agreement because, what if something were to happen at the beginning of next year? You'd be so disappointed if you didn't reach this agreement. Okay. Now, does she know something, or is that just a weird coincidence? But their scenarios say that there's going to be some kind of outbreak in eastern Venezuela in 2025. So go to catastrophiccontagion.com and see what the heck is going on. To summarize all of this, and I know we've tried to keep it short, but we're running long. If you go to rejecttheamendments.com, you can learn the details of what's in the amendments. If you go to stopthetreaty.org, you can learn the latest version of the treaty. And if you go to exitthewho.org, I've worked with dozens of people in nations all around the world. There's 15 actions that people can take, and some of those have multiple things that people can do. So rejecttheamendments.com, stopthetreaty.org, and exitthewho.org. Step number one is to just get clear on what's going on. Locally, you've got to deal with the people who screwed you over or tried to for the past 4 years. That's still a local issue. The amendments are about quarantine and international travel. And the treaty is just corruption. It's just organized crime. They're trying to set up a racketeering organization to control billions of dollars that they want to take from wealthy nations, via tax or debt, and give it to oligarchs to build out an industry that's essentially biological warfare on their own people so that they can profiteer from the next pandemic.
And you guys can go to his Substack, which is in the description. But yeah, man, that was brilliant. I appreciate it. That was
No, thanks for having me. Thanks
yeah.
for having
No, we'll have to do an update and as we keep our eyes on Venezuela.
me. They're having meetings this week negotiating the quote unquote treaty/framework convention, and they're not going well. In the last thing that they made public, they were quite down. Their energy was really down, and they said, "Well, if there's a miracle um, by Thursday, because the negotiations are supposed to end on the 28th, Thursday, March 28th. If there's a miracle, okay, maybe great." But they said, "Yeah, we're probably going to have another meeting in April." They're having problems. It's not going well, and we need step number one always is get clear on the facts. Because if you're chasing a red herring, if you're barking up the wrong tree or whatever metaphor you want to use, if you're talking about sovereignty and you don't realize that the sovereignty that they are talking about is the poor nations, and it's literally in the darn document, they have a sovereign right to their biological resources. They want to get paid for the pathogens that they find. They don't want EcoHealth Alliance swooping in and taking that valuable resource and turning it into money. That is what they mean when they're talking about sovereignty. It's not the local freedoms and unalienable rights that were taken away by fellow Americans. Okay, that's a local issue, and the sovereignty that they are talking about ties in to making money from finding deadly pathogens. If you think that finding pathogens and bringing them into a lab, turning them into, medical countermeasures and inflicting them upon the people without any testing, if you think that's how you stop the next pandemic, then you're on their team because that's what they're arguing for. If you think that is what caused the problem over the last 4 years and is likely to be the cause of future pandemics, man-made ridiculousness, we need to start pushing back against the plans that they have for ongoing biological warfare against, we the people.
Absolute madness. Yeah, Mr. Roguski, thank you so much for coming on here, dude. I
No,
sent you,
anytime.
yeah, I sent you the link, and yeah, I'd love to have you back on sometime, dude. Don't be a stranger. And yeah, guys, the top link in the description is his Substack, so please go join that. And thank you for your tireless research, dude. And I appreciate time out of your
No.
day. Most
Oh
importantly,
no,
thank you.
anytime. And they're meeting on May 27th to June 1st. So, let's schedule something in between there. We'll give you an update. I have every hope that regular people can understand what I just said. And like we did about a decade ago with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, raise such a stink that no politician could ever stand in support of what they're proposing. If you don't get clear on what these proposals are, you're barking up the wrong tree. Once you know what they are, I don't know anybody unless they're in line for a contract for some laboratory equipment or, unless they're on the receiving end of the corruption. Anybody who looks at this says, that's insane. Why are they even doing that? But if you're arguing the wrong argument, you got to get clear on what is really in these documents. And once you do that, it's a no-brainer. and I have every faith. We did it a decade ago with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Regular people are probably the most clear-headed um, people in the world. That they look at this, they see it for what it is. They can see the corruption. It's not about your health. It's about a transfer of wealth to the people who did the harm to the global north, but they missed a good market in the global south, and they're trying to build it out.
Um, Shoot me an email if you could. Like after this, reminding me to schedule you for May.
We'll
Because
do.
it'll
We'll
go
do.
in one ear at the other. I juggle way too many shows. But if you shoot me an email, I'll get into the calendar today. I
We'll see you in the future.
All right,
Thank
dude.
you so
I
much.
appreciate it, guys. Please go check out his Substack. Thank you so much, man. Take care,
Recording
everybody.
stopped.
God bless. Peace. And if you guys like that, again, please go to American Hartford Gold. The link is in the description. He's a cool guy. Link is in the description, or you can text Tommy to 65532 and get I don't know, get 8% off of bullion. And like I said, man, you don't have to. It doesn't. I've said it before. I'll say it again for the millionth time. It doesn't even really matter to me what the sponsor is or what they're shilling is, dude. If they're willing to support my show which has been kicked off of Reddit, iTunes, YouTube, Twitter, and now starting Spotify. Um, yeah, man, that's cool enough for me. I don't really care what they're selling. But that being said, they are selling bullion, which is something I do invest in. It's because I don't, if you can't tell, I'm pretty paranoid about my show and being banned, and I don't trust anyone or anything. Um, yeah, so like this chunk of silver here, this is mine. They didn't send this to me. This is for my own collection. If you use promo code Tommy, you can win, I think, $5,000 free silver. This is 100 ounces, which is like, I think 3 grand. I have no idea. The prices are going up. Not even trying to sound like, oh, you better get it now. The prices are going up. No, no. I mean, objectively, silver and gold are going up, and they're not really going up. It's just inflation, and so that's the whole entire point why I bought the fucking shit in the first place, is to get away from inflation. A 50-gram piece of gold 3 years ago was like $3,300 with tax. Now it's like 3,600 without tax. And you're not actually making money. It's not that it's going up. It's just that that's inflation, you know? That goes up, but so does your rent and so does food, which is the entire reason why I bought it, because I needed something secure. I wasn't looking to go gamble on the stock market. I needed it to fund the podcast. One day when I get more money, hopefully I will be able to invest in stocks and actually turn a profit. But the entire reason why I guess spend money on the external hard drives and offsite storage is because it's security. So the reason why I invest in bullion is to keep the podcast going, so I can pay rent, pay for all the fucking software and subscriptions I use, blah blah blah. So guys, again, please go support a company that supports my show, American Hartford Gold. And also, I mean, Heaven's Harvest, I had that guy on here, Clayton. Go in the description, use promo code Tommy. I've been putting up videos of where I was, I was kind of like Peter in a Family Guy, where he eats all the dried food and then drinks water. And it's like, everybody leave now. Um, I was eating all like the freeze dried raspberries last week. They're fucking great, dude. Again, that's not what they're for, but because I'm a fat ass, I was eating them at night. And also go to the wellness company, go get all your vitamins and supplements. And Prismatic Energy, you want a home battery system, you go there as well. All the links are in the description, or you can join the locals or the Patreon, or super chat me on the podcast itself, and then in the description, my PayPal's there, Cash App's there, all that good stuff. You like the show, you like that it's not behind a paywall, you guys like that I can cover any and all topics and say whatever I want. Shit, fuck, balls, tits, with no repercussion, other than self-respect and commercial viability. Please go support the podcast financially. The podcast runs on money. I know it's not a fun discussion to have. This is the how we're splitting the bill. The podcast runs on money. It runs on, and by money I mean rent, food, utilities. If you guys like the show, you guys like the guests I have, you guys like the topics I cover, and the fact that I will listen to any argument, and I don't give a shit what's verboten and misinformation, like a good little Nazi boy, yeah. Support the show. All right, guys. Much love. See y'all tomorrow. Take care, everybody. I'm gonna go get a haircut. God bless. Peace.